My siblings betrayed me, convincing our parents, the king and queen, to exile me from the kingdom, never realizing I was the true mastermind behind everything that kept the realm prosperous. From the moment I was born, my siblings despised me. Not because I had wronged them, simply because I existed. To the people, we were the perfect royal family. My father, King Aldrich, was respected as a wise ruler of the kingdom of Validria, once the most prosperous kingdom on the continent. My mother, Queen Eleanor, was admired for her grace and elegance. My older brother, Prince Andrew, was the crown prince and the pride of the entire kingdom. From the day he was born, everyone believed he was destined to become one of the greatest kings in history. My younger sister, Princess Helen, was the precious jewel of the palace. Beautiful, charming, and endlessly spoiled, she could ask for anything, and our parents would gladly place it in her hands. And then, there was me, Princess Lucille Ashburn, the forgotten middle child, the daughter nobody noticed, but silence became my greatest weapon. Unlike my siblings, I never had the privilege of attending royal lessons. Those were reserved for the future rulers of the kingdom. According to my parents, it would be nonsense to invest in my education, because according to them I would end up marrying any rich man and be a housewife without occupation. This was something I would never plan to do. Every morning, Prince Andrew would be escorted to the strategy hall, where the kingdom's finest generals taught him military tactics, diplomacy, and the art of leading an army. Princess Helen, on the other hand, spent her lessons with the royal treasurer and experienced ministers, supposedly learning about taxation, commerce, and the management of the kingdom's resources. My parents believed they were preparing the perfect king and princess. If only they had known the truth. Andrew had no real interest in military strategy. The moment the instructors turned their backs, he joked with the sons of noble families, competed to see who could throw paper balls the farthest across the room, or simply stared out the window, waiting for the lesson to end. Helen wasn't much different. She found lessons on finance unbearably dull. Rather than paying attention, she whispered with her friends, admired new dresses in fashion catalogs, or complained until the tutors dismissed class early. Neither of them cared about becoming capable rulers. They simply assumed the crown would one day be theirs. Every afternoon, after their lessons ended, servants gathered the books they had carelessly abandoned. Most of the time, they were left untouched. One day, curiosity got the better of me. I picked up one of Andrew's books after everyone had left. It was a heavy volume on military formations and battlefield strategy. I barely understood a single page, but instead of putting it back, I kept reading. The next day, I borrowed another book. Then another. Soon, it became my secret routine. Night after night, page after page, my knowledge grew. I was learning what it truly meant to rule a kingdom. As the years passed, my siblings finally reached the age where they were expected to take their first steps toward governing the kingdom. My parents believed it was time for them to gain practical experience before one day inheriting greater responsibilities. Prince Andrew was appointed as the assistant to the Minister of Military Affairs, while Princess Helen began working alongside the Minister of Resources and Finance. It was supposed to be the beginning of their journey as future leaders of Validria. Each week, the ministers entrusted them with real matters of state. They were expected to study reports, analyze problems, and draft proposals that could help the kingdom overcome its challenges. Andrew found the work unbearably dull. Sitting for hours reading reports was far less exciting than spending the afternoon fencing with his noble friends or drinking expensive wine while boasting about the glorious king he would someday become. Helen wasn't interested either. She considered meetings with accountants and ministers painfully tedious. She would much rather spend her days ordering new dresses from famous tailors, tasting the latest pastries prepared by the royal chefs, or gossiping with the daughters of influential nobles. One afternoon, both of them stepped into the palace corridor carrying stacks of unfinished documents. By chance, they met outside the council chambers. "This is torture," Andrew groaned, dropping the papers onto a nearby table. "The minister expects another military proposal by sunset." "I'd rather spend the afternoon with my friends." Helen rolled her eyes in agreement. "Tell me about it. I promised the girls we'd visit the capital today." "A famous designer just arrived from the southern kingdoms, and I refused to miss it because of another boring report." Andrew crossed his arms before a mischievous smile appeared on his face. "There has to be someone willing to write these things for us," Helen laughed. "For the right amount of gold, I'm sure half the palace would." Without another thought, Andrew called over a passing servant. "You," he ordered casually, "find someone intelligent enough to finish these reports for us. Offer them a few gold coins if necessary. We don't care who does it, as long as it's finished before sunset." The frightened servant bowed repeatedly before hurrying away. Neither of them waited to see what would happen. Laughing together, they left the palace to enjoy the afternoon they believed they deserved. I had witnessed the entire conversation from the end of the hallway. For a moment, I simply stood there in silence. The servant would never find anyone capable of solving problems that even experienced ministers struggled with. And even if he did, who would dare submit ideas under someone else's name? After a long sigh, I quietly walked into the empty room. The reports remained untouched on the table. I gathered every document, carefully reading each page before taking out fresh sheets of paper. Everything I had learned over the years suddenly had a purpose. The countless nights spent reading forgotten books, the notes hidden inside my journal, the conversations with the royal librarian, they all guided my hand. When I finally finished, I neatly placed both reports exactly where my siblings had left them. Then I quietly slipped away before anyone could see me. Nearly 2 hours later, Andrew and Helen returned. The moment they noticed the completed documents resting on the table, both of them exchanged delighted smiles. "It seems the servant actually found some fool willing to do all the work." Andrew chuckled as he picked up the reports. Helen giggled. "Perfect. Perhaps we should keep this person around." Neither of them bothered asking who had written the proposals. To them, it didn't matter. They proudly delivered the reports to their respective ministers. The results exceeded every expectation. The Minister of Military Affairs praised Andrew's strategic thinking, claiming he possessed remarkable talent despite his young age. Meanwhile, the Minister of Resources admired Helen's practical solutions, describing them as some of the most balanced recommendations he had seen from a member of the royal family in years. My siblings accepted every compliment with effortless smiles. For the first time in years, the palace grew a little quieter, and I convinced myself that perhaps this was enough. For a while, I truly believed I had found peace. As long as my siblings continued taking credit for my work, they stayed too occupied with their endless praise and admiration to pay any attention to me. I convinced myself that perhaps this strange arrangement was enough. The kingdom prospered, the people lived well, and I could continue helping from the shadows. But peace inside the royal palace never lasted for long. One afternoon, after carefully finishing yet another pair of reports, I placed the documents neatly on Andrew's desk and turned to leave. I had barely taken a few steps when the chamber doors suddenly opened. Andrew and Helen stood in the doorway. For a brief moment, none of us moved. Their eyes shifted from me to the reports lying on the desk, then back to me. Andrew's expression twisted with rage. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Before I could answer, he strode across the room and shoved me with all his strength. I crashed onto the marble floor, my shoulder striking the cold stone. The reports scattered across the room. Helen folded her arms, glaring at me with pure disgust. So it was you. I struggled to sit up. I can explain. You don't get to explain, Andrew shouted. He kicked one of the papers across the floor before pointing accusingly at me. These are confidential state documents. Do you realize what crime you've committed? I stared at both of them in disbelief. A crime, I whispered. Then years of silence finally broke. What crime? I said, forcing myself to my feet. What work are you talking about? You two abandon every assignment you're given. You spend your days drinking wine, shopping, gossiping, and playing with your friends while someone else solves every problem for you. Their faces froze. You call yourselves future rulers, I continued, my voice trembling with anger. You're nothing but two useless cowards hiding behind other people's work. The next second, slap. Helen's hand struck my cheek so hard that my head snapped to the side. A burning pain spread across my face. Before I could recover, Andrew grabbed a fistful of my hair and yanked me backward. Know your place, he hissed through gritted teeth. Stop sticking your nose into matters that don't concern you. Tears filled my eyes, more from humiliation than pain. They concern me because I'm the one. You've said enough. Andrew shoved me back onto the floor. Then he turned toward the hallway. Guards, he shouted. Several royal guards rushed into the chamber almost immediately. Andrew pointed directly at me. This woman was caught stealing and tampering with official state documents. The guards hesitated. Everyone in the palace knew I was quiet and harmless. The accusation didn't seem to fit me, but before anyone could question it, another pair of footsteps echoed through the corridor. King Aldrich and Queen Eleanor entered the chamber. The moment Helen saw them, her entire expression changed. Her anger vanished. Instead, tears instantly welled in her eyes. She rushed toward our mother, sobbing dramatically. Mother, she cried, Lucille betrayed us. Queen Eleanor immediately embraced her youngest daughter. What happened? Helen buried her face against her shoulder. We caught her altering the reports Andrew and I had been preparing for the ministers. If we hadn't arrived in time, she sniffled, thought she could have ruined everything. King Aldrich slowly turned toward Andrew. Is this true? Andrew lowered his head, pretending to be disappointed. I'm afraid it is, Father. We found her going through confidential documents and changing official reports behind our backs. I don't know what she intended to do, but it could have endangered the entire kingdom. I felt as though the air had left my lungs. I shouted desperately. That's not what happened. Those reports were mine. I wrote every single one of them because they... Silence. My father's voice thundered through the chamber. How dare you lie after committing such disgraceful treason? I'm telling the truth. They're lying. Neither of my parents allowed me to finish. Queen Eleanor looked at me with disappointment instead of concern. I never imagined one of my own daughters would try to destroy her brother and sister out of jealousy. Jealousy. That single word hurt more than every insult I had endured growing up. Andrew slowly stepped forward, lowering his voice just enough to sound reasonable. Father? Someone willing to betray their own family is capable of betraying the kingdom as well. He paused before delivering the final blow. I don't believe someone like that deserves to remain part of the royal family. Helen nodded through fake tears. Please, Father, she whispered. For the safety of the kingdom, you have to send her away. I looked at my parents one last time. Surely they would ask for proof. Surely they would hear me out. Instead, King Aldrich's expression hardened. I will not allow a traitor to stain the honor of this family. He raised his hand without a second thought. Princess Lucille of Valedria. His voice was cold. From this moment forward, you are stripped of your title, your privileges, and your place within the royal family. The room fell silent. I hereby sentence you to permanent and exile for treason against the kingdom. I dropped to my knees. Father, please, please. I toward my mother. Mother, please listen to me. Neither of them looked back. The guards stepped forward, taking hold of my arms as I begged them to hear the truth. No one did. As I was dragged through the palace gates, I looked back one final time at the only home I had ever known. The heavy palace gates closed behind me with a deafening thud. By the following afternoon, exhaustion finally overcame me. I collapsed onto a small stone bench near the edge of the city, wrapping my trembling arms around myself as tears silently rolled down my cheeks. Everything I had sacrificed, everything I had endured, had been erased by a single lie. I no longer knew where I belonged. Suddenly, the rain stopped falling on my shoulders. Confused, I slowly looked up. A dark blue traveling cloak had been draped over me. Standing before me was a young man about my age. He wore an elegant navy uniform embroidered with silver thread, bearing a crest I recognized immediately. It was not the emblem of Valedria. It belonged to the neighboring kingdom of Erinder. For generations, our kingdoms had competed for influence across the continent. Although they weren't constantly at war, neither their side trusted the other. The young man studied me for a moment before smiling faintly. So, he tilted his head with amused curiosity. "You're the famous exiled princess." I instinctively stepped back. "Who are you?" He offered a polite bow. "My name is Lord Cassian Ashford. I serve as the personal assistant to the First Minister of Erindor." His answer only confused me further. "What are you doing here?" Cassian adjusted his gloves before replying. "I arrived yesterday as part of a diplomatic delegation. Our kingdom hoped to discuss a possible alliance with Valedria. Frankly, we were impressed by how efficiently your kingdom had been managed over the past few years." A bitter smile appeared on my face. "I suppose that meeting didn't go very well," he chuckled. "It was interrupted rather dramatically. The royal family scandal. It was postponed until today. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. After a long pause, he simply said, 'Come with me.' He led me through the quieter districts of the capital until we reached a modest boarding house run by an elderly couple. It was far from luxurious, but it was warm. Cassian paid for 3 days of lodging and meals before handing the owner a small patch of coins. I stared at him in disbelief. "You didn't have to do this." "Pat, but someone should." Emotion tightened my throat. "I'll repay every coin someday." He shook his head. "Forget the money." His expression became serious. "If what you told me is true, I'd rather hear the entire story." So I told him everything, from the endless humiliation inside the palace, to the reports I secretly wrote, to the day I was accused of treason. Cassian listened without interrupting. At first, his expression revealed polite skepticism, but as I described military logistics, tax reforms, supply chains, diplomatic negotiations, and economic planning in remarkable detail, his eyes slowly widened. These weren't things someone could invent. They were the observations of someone who genuinely understood how a kingdom functioned. Even so, he refused to draw conclusions without proof. The following morning, he attended the diplomatic meeting that had been postponed. From beginning to end, he carefully observed Prince Andrew and Princess Helen. They proudly spoke of their recent accomplishments. Yet every time the conversation became specific, they stumbled. When asked why certain trade reforms had succeeded, their explanations contradicted one another. When questioned about military logistics, Andrew offered vague answers that made little practical sense. Cassian said nothing, but doubt had already begun to grow. Later that afternoon, while walking toward the palace corridors, he passed near the servants' quarters. 3 servants were chatting quietly. unaware that anyone was nearby. One of them laughed. I still can't believe the crown prince actually gave me gold to find someone willing to write those reports. The others looked surprised. You found someone? The servant burst into laughter. Not a single person. I kept every coin. Funny thing is, every time I came back, the reports had already been finished. The other servants exchanged puzzled looks. So, who wrote them? The first servant shrugged. I've wondered that myself. Cassian froze. Everything suddenly fell into place. Lucille hadn't lied. She had been telling the truth all along. He could have reported everything to King Aldrich. He could have exposed the deception immediately. Instead, another idea crossed his mind. A far more valuable one. Why return the greatest strategist Valedria had ever produced, when Arindor could welcome her instead? That evening, Cassian returned to the boarding house. Lucille looked up as he entered. Without saying a word, he placed a sealed map of Arindor on the table. I believe you. She stared at him in surprise. I confirmed enough. Then he looked directly into her eyes. Come to Arindor. She hesitated. I don't belong anywhere anymore. You would belong there. Our kingdom is smaller than Valedria. We have fewer soldiers, less wealth, and fewer nobles. He smiled. But we have one thing your kingdom clearly lacks. We recognize talent when we see it. Lucille lowered her eyes. For her entire life, no one had ever called her talented. Cassian continued. I've met generals who know less strategy than you. I've met ministers who understand economics less than you. You've spent years saving a kingdom that never even knew your name. He paused before saying the words that finally reached her heart. You deserve to live somewhere your abilities are valued, not hidden. For the first time since leaving the palace, Lucille felt something she thought had disappeared forever. Hope. Perhaps exile wasn't the end of her story. Perhaps it was the beginning of the life she should have lived all along. The journey to Arindor took several days. Unlike Valedria's towering castles and extravagant palaces, Arindor immediately felt different. Its capital was smaller, its streets less luxurious, and its buildings lacked the overwhelming grandeur of the kingdom I had once called home. Yet everywhere I looked, people seemed busy rather than idle. Merchants greeted one another with smiles, soldiers trained with discipline instead of arrogance, and officials walked through the streets listening to the concerns of ordinary citizens, instead of surrounding themselves with unnecessary luxury. It was not the richest kingdom, but it felt alive. Upon our arrival, Lord Cassian wasted no time introducing me to the First Minister. The elderly statesman listened patiently as Cassian recounted everything that had happened in Valedria, from my exile to the suspicious behavior of Prince Andrew and Princess Helen during the diplomatic meeting. The minister remained silent for a long time. Finally, he folded his hands together. If even half of this is true, he looked directly at me, then Valedria has committed the greatest political mistake of this generation. Even so, he refused to act recklessly. This decision belongs to His Majesty. That very afternoon, I was escorted into the royal audience chamber. The King of Arindor was nothing like my father. King Edmund was still a young ruler, perhaps only a few years older than Lord Cassian. There was no arrogance in his expression, nor did he rush to pass judgment. Instead, he listened quietly while the First Minister explained my story and Cassian described everything he had witnessed inside Valedria's palace. When the room finally fell silent, the king looked at me for several moments before speaking. I believe every person deserves the opportunity to be heard. His voice was calm but firm. However, I cannot entrust the future of my kingdom to someone I have only just met. I lowered my head in understanding. I don't ask for your trust, Your Majesty. I ask for the chance to earn it. A faint smile appeared on his face. A wise answer. He turned toward Cassian. Until we know each other better, Lady Lucille will work under Lord Cassian's supervision. Every morning Lord Cassian arrived carrying staring stacks of reports collected from different ministries. What would you recommend? Hour after hour, we debated every proposal. Sometimes our opinions differed, forcing us to challenge one another's reasoning until we reached stronger solutions together. The First Minister often joined our discussions as well. At first, he merely observed. Soon, however, he began asking for my opinion directly before meetings with the king. Months passed. The reports we prepared together slowly became official policy. Whenever the First Minister presented our proposals before the Royal Council, he never claimed the credit for himself. Nor did Lord Cassian. As the months turned into years, the royal court gradually came to trust me completely. His Majesty granted me the noble title of Lady Lucille Ashburn, recognizing my service to the kingdom. Soon afterward, I was invited to advise not only the Ministry of Finance and Military Affairs, but also the Ministries of Education and Public Health. Each new responsibility allowed me to help even more people. The frightened princess who had once wandered the streets without food or shelter slowly disappeared. In her place stood a respected noblewoman. My salary was generous enough to purchase 2 modest homes within the capital, one that I lived in and another that I rented to a local family. I even hired 2 loyal servants, though I insisted they dine at the same table as the rest of the household. Then, one autumn morning, everything changed. A messenger arrived carrying reports from neighboring kingdoms. Rumors spread quickly across the royal council. Was collapsing. The kingdom that had once been considered the continent's greatest power was now losing both its wealth and its people. None of it surprised me. I had always known this day would come. Andrew and Helen had spent years receiving praise for knowledge they never possessed. The situation became so desperate that even King Aldrich could no longer deny it. One report after another revealed the same painful truth. Families were abandoning Validria in search of a better future. Faced with a crisis unlike any in his reign, King Aldrich swallowed his pride. He gathered his royal delegation and announced his intention to travel to Erendur. Officially, he wished to negotiate an alliance and request economic assistance. Unofficially, he hoped to save the kingdom before it was too late. The invitation was delivered to the royal council that same afternoon. Silence filled the chamber. Everyone understood why Validria had come. Their kingdom was collapsing. The question was whether Erendur should help them. King Edmund remained thoughtful. I fear this meeting may create unnecessary conflict, he admitted. Lady Lucille now serves our kingdom faithfully. Seeing the family who betrayed her may reopen old wounds. Queen Isabella gently placed a hand over his. The king looked at his wife. For years she carried the burden of an entire kingdom without receiving so much as a single word of gratitude. Then let the truth finally be known. King Edmund smiled faintly. I believe you're right. Turning toward the First Minister, he gave his order. Accept their request. 3 days from now, we shall receive the royal family of Validria. 3 days later, the royal carriage crossed Erendur's gates. Although the visitors wore magnificent garments embroidered with gold and jewels, their appearance betrayed the truth. King Aldrich looked years older. Queen Eleanor's face had grown pale. Prince Andrew's once pristine appearance had been replaced by an unkempt beard and exhausted eyes. Even Princess Helen, despite the expensive makeup covering her face, couldn't completely hide the dark circles beneath her eyes. To the ordinary observer, they still appeared regal. But every official in Erendur already knew the reality. The welcoming ceremony continued with perfect courtesy. Everyone smiled politely. Everyone bowed appropriately. High above the palace gardens, Lucille stood alone upon a marble balcony. overlooking the entrance. She watched the familiar royal carriage pass through the gates. The same crest, the same colors, the same family that had abandoned her. Inside the grand audience hall, King Edmund welcomed his guests with perfect courtesy. As servants served tea and delicate pastries, he spoke proudly about Arunder's recent prosperity. Our kingdom has grown because every member of this court fulfills their duty. We work together. We solve problems together. Our people always come first. King Aldrich smiled politely. So admirable. But inside, his anxiety grew with every passing minute. Before leaving Valedria, he had threatened both of his children. Andrew had been warned that if he failed to convince Arundor to provide aid, he would answer personally for the kingdom's continued decline. Helen had received a different ultimatum. If diplomacy fails, then charm someone important. Win over a powerful lord if you must. And do not return empty-handed. As Helen glanced across the room, one man immediately caught her attention. Lord Cassian, elegant, confident. Standing beside King Edmund as he quietly discussed matters of state, a handsome noble, surely one of the king's closest advisers, perfect. While the rulers exchanged pleasantries, Helen gracefully approached him. My lord, I've heard wonderful things about you. Cassian offered a courteous smile. The honor is mine, princess. Helen laughed sweetly. I do hope you'll show me your beautiful kingdom before I leave. Cassian politely continued the conversation. Outwardly, he appeared perfectly composed. Inwardly, he felt nothing but disgust. Yet he allowed the conversation to continue. He wanted to see just how far the princess was willing to manipulate others for her own benefit. Eventually, the formal negotiations began. King Aldrich rose from his chair. Your Majesty, Valedria wishes to establish a lasting alliance with Arundor. As proof of our sincerity, my daughter Helen would gladly consider a political marriage should such a union strengthen the friendship between our kingdoms. Helen lowered her head gracefully. And my son, Prince Andrew, is among the finest military strategists of our generation. Andrew proudly bowed. Hidden behind one of the great marble columns, Lucille listened silently. Every word, every lie, sounded painfully familiar. King Edmund remained expressionless. Then, his eyes briefly shifted toward the far side of the hall. Lucille had arrived. Without speaking, he exchanged a single glance with Lord Cassian. Cassian understood immediately. He quietly disappeared before returning moments later, walking beside Lady Lucille. King Edmund slowly stood. I appreciate your generous proposal, but before discussing alliances, I would like to introduce those responsible for Arundor's success. He began walking through the hall. My beloved Queen Isabella, the First Minister, Lord Cassian. Helen smiled proudly toward him. Our ministers of education, health, military affairs, each received respectful applause. Then the king stopped. His smile became warmer. There is, however, one person whose wisdom, compassion, and extraordinary judgment have transformed this kingdom more than anyone else. He extended his hand. Lady Lucille Ashburn. The great hall fell silent. Every noble instinctively stepped aside. And there she stood. Elegant, confident, radiant. Gone was the frightened girl who had once been dragged from her home. Before them stood a graceful noble woman wearing a magnificent sky-blue gown embroidered with silver and gold. Delicate sapphire jewels shimmered beneath the palace lights, while her calm expression carried the quiet dignity of someone who no longer sought anyone's approval. King Aldrich stared in horror. Queen Eleanor covered her mouth. Andrew's face turned ghostly pale. Helen's smile vanished completely. Lucille? King Edmund continued. Lady Lucille has been one of the brilliant minds behind Erinder's remarkable prosperity. Every major reform you've admired, every successful strategy, has been strengthened by her insight and dedication. King Aldrich staggered backward. That's impossible. She was exiled for treason. Andrew immediately raised his voice. Your Majesty? She's a traitor? She once attempted to conspire against our family. Lucille calmly stepped forward. Her voice remained perfectly composed. Then answer me one question. She looked directly at Andrew. What military strategy have you personally created that successfully protected Valedria? Andrew froze. His lips parted. No words came. Lucille slowly turned toward Helen. And you? Name a single economic decree you wrote yourself. Helen looked around desperately. I'll. A nervous silence followed. Lucille let out a soft laugh. Then she slowly walked around the 4 members of her former family. So, you're still pretending. She stopped before her father. Tell me, father, were you truly so blind? His breathing became uneven. She didn't allow him to continue. For 3 years, I wrote every military proposal, every financial reform, every recommendation your ministers praised. I carried your kingdom, while they accepted every compliment. And when I was finally discovered, you exiled me without asking for a single piece of evidence. Tears filled King Aldrich's eyes. Queen Eleanor's knees gave way beneath her. Andrew looked unable to breathe. Helen stared at the floor in complete disbelief. One by one, the 4 of them fell their knees. We were deceived, King Aldrich whispered. Please, forgive us, Queen Eleanor sobbed uncontrollably. We didn't know. Andrew stammered excuse after excuse. Helen could only cry. King Edmund watched the scene with visible disappointment. A king incapable of teaching honesty within his own family has no foundation upon which to build an alliance. He looked toward Andrew. A prince who cannot answer a single question. Toward Helen, a princess whose greatest talent is deception. Then finally toward Lucille. And yet the daughter you cast aside has become one of the brightest minds this kingdom has ever welcomed. There will be no alliance. My decision is final. Helen suddenly lunged toward Lucille. You ruined everything. Before she could reach her, royal guards restrained her. She screamed in frustration. At that moment, Lord Cassian quietly stepped beside Lucille. My lady, are you all right? She gave a small nod. Without hesitation, he gently wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Lucille allowed herself to lean into him. For the first time, she no longer felt alone. Helen stared at them in disbelief. The nobleman she had hoped to charm had been standing beside Lucille all along. King Aldrich crawled forward on his knees. Lucille, please, I beg you, forgive your father. Queen Eleanor repeatedly lowered her forehead against the marble floor. Sobbing as she apologized, Lucille looked at them quietly. There was no hatred left in her heart, only acceptance. You ask for forgiveness now, because you finally know the truth. She looked directly into her father's eyes. This happened because of your own blindness. You chose favoritism over fairness. You believed lies, and never once listened to the daughter who only wanted to help you. She took one final step backward. The consequences you face today were created by your own decisions. King Edmund raised his hand. Escort the royal family of Valedria from the palace. The guards obeyed immediately. Their desperate cries echoed through the corridors. Please, mercy. No one answered. Within days, the humiliating encounter spread across the continent. Every neighboring kingdom spoke of the foolish royal family that had exiled the very woman responsible for their prosperity. At the same time, Lady Lucille's name became a symbol of wisdom, perseverance, and justice. 1 year later, Validria finally collapsed. Its once great kingdom disappeared into history. When the news reached Lucille, she quietly folded the letter and returned to her work. She no longer wished to dwell on the past. Her future was waiting. The forgotten princess, the exiled daughter, had finally found what she had searched for all her life. Not revenge, not a crown, but a place where she was valued, a family who chose her, and a future she had earned with her own hands.